Hey guys, how we doing? So I'm up here in these trails behind this park up here, and it's really gorgeous in here and very quiet, very peaceful. I've seen a few deer pretty up close, and but I thought I'd talk to you guys for a little bit because you know people ask me all the time, when they ask me what do I do, and I say, well, I'm a self-development coach and a meditation teacher. I think not surprisingly, usually it's what does that mean, and then it's how did you get into it. So here it goes. Here's how I got into it. So, in 2007, that's when I really got into things that were really sort of spiritual and meditation and things like that. And what brought me to it was, I had moved to Los Angeles in 2001 to go to school for music. It was a jazz guitar performance program at a big university and took about 8 people a year, so very competitive. And I left after about 2.5 years to pursue the music projects that I had going on. I had my own bands, a lot of bands that I was in, and one of them in particular was really sort of my baby. It was my big project that I was doing most of the writing for, along with the vocalist who was also a keyboard player and then the bass player, and but a lot of it was really driven by, like, a lot of the stylistic direction was really sort of defined by my writing in some ways, and we were in the middle of trying to get a get a record underway. We had an engineer. He was trying to bring in different people to produce, and it was a big step up. It was very exciting, and sort of out of nowhere, not really in retrospect, but at the time, very suddenly, the lead singer left the country to move to Tokyo to become a model and an actress and a singer, and she still lives there today, almost 10 years later, done very well for herself, from what I understand, been very successful. But it totally just rocked my world. I was pretty devastated in some ways. I was rudderless and just didn't really know what to do next. But I just sort of, because all my eggs were in that basket, and I was trying to force it to work, I think, in some ways. And I just never accounted for the idea that this might not come through, and it didn't. So, but I knew I had to keep going somehow. So I was working at this party hotel on the Sunset Strip at the time, and I go to one of my coworkers, Eddie, Eddie Zamora, who's one of my best friends in the world right now, and I just ask him if he's got a recommendation for a vocal coach, because Eddie's a singer too. So he refers me to Norma Mendoza, who had been his vocal coach for some years when they both lived in Miami, and now Norma lives in California, just like the rest of us were living. And so I call Norma. I start taking lessons from her. And Norma is this incredible woman because she's this teeny tiny lady with sort of alpine white hair in her 80s. And, so she's from a certain generation where it's not common for a woman to know how to fly an airplane and, have a very high golf score, golf average. And she was married 4 times, I think mostly because I think men of that generation just were not prepared for a woman that was as independent as she is. And she had this incredible career in first opera and then jazz and then popular music. So an amazing resource for musical growth. But she was a lot more than that. She was my first ever self-development mentor, because what she started doing was she wouldn't just make me repeat passages if I was out of tune or whatever, or projecting from the wrong place vocally. She was calling out things like, cynicism or negativity or a bad attitude or what she called self-limiting beliefs. And I'd never heard that kind of talk before. I'd never heard an expression like that. Nowadays, you hear that kind of stuff all the time. At that time, in the circles I was in, that was a totally new idea. And she was really running circles around me. I mean, this is somebody who it was like she just was always 10 steps ahead and knew things about me before I knew them and could point them out and reveal them to myself where it was undeniable. And that was very uncomfortable for my ego. It was, it just was like, oh, it felt invasive, and it felt like, what are you doing? Calling me out on this kind of stuff. Who are you to do that? But the reality is, as much as I hated to admit it at the time, yes, my attitude was getting better and I was becoming happier. Like I said, my ego wasn't even happy would begrudgingly admit it at the time. So one of the things she did was she started lending me these audio programs and books and things like that, and it really fascinated me. It fascinated me because it was able to get so deep under my skin so easily. And I said, what is it about this stuff? So one night I'm in my apartment in Silver Lake and I'm jotting down 10 different things that I can do to, you know, actionable things that are going to take my life in a direction that I choose for myself. That's a big part of this stuff, is getting behind the driver's seat, not just living in a reactionary way, but really making choices about what you want to do, what you want your life to mean to you, and not just sort of going along with the flow of circumstances, right? So I don't remember any of the other things I wrote down, but one of them was start doing yoga. I don't know where this came from, because my concept of yoga at the time was that character from Street Fighter 2, Dhalsim, who he says like yoga fire, and he blows fire out of his mouth, and he has a necklace of human bones, and you know, it looks like he hasn't eaten anything in 6 months, you know. So that's my concept of yoga. Okay. You know, I had gotten very into the Tao Te Ching in my freshman year of high school. I really fell in love with that book, but I didn't really get serious about this stuff. And I never became a practitioner by any means, you know, when it comes to Eastern philosophy. The philosophy fascinated me, but I'd also lost touch with that over the intervening years, you know, being in rock bands and stuff like that. Some people, you know, keep up with, you know, their interests before that. I kind of got swallowed up in that world to a degree. So I go to look for a yoga studio in my neighborhood. I just punch in the zip code on, it must have been MapQuest in those days, and I find this place in the Los Feliz Village about 10 minutes away from my apartment. And I look at their calendar and I see that they've got a yoga dash meditation class from 4 to 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. So that seems, I realized right away, right, that this is not the place for a beginner like me to start. This is obviously the advanced class. You know, who's going to show up to a beginning yoga class at 4 in the morning, right? These are for serious people, clearly. But with my schedule, working 40 to 50 hours a week at this restaurant in the Sunset Strip, living in Silver Lake, and still playing in like 45 different bands at the time and having lots of rehearsals and things, you know, I said, this is the only time that can fit in my schedule. So I'm just going to go. So I went. So picture this. It's like February 7th, 2007, or February 4th or 5th, something like that, you know, first couple weeks of February. And I'm there at, what, 3:55 a.m. And you enter through the back. It's very dark. The door is ajar. You open it. The foyer is, again, completely dark, except that through this beaded curtain on the other side, not even a door, you can see this one little candle sitting on the floor, right? And there are these 3 women sitting around it wearing white and chanting in Sanskrit for 30 minutes. That's pretty weird, right? Especially if you don't know anything about this stuff. Zero exposure. Because I'll tell you, the only frame of reference I had was that scene in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom when they sacrifice this guy to the goddess Kali. Like, the high priest tears the heart out of his chest, chanting the name of Kali. So that's, again, my only reference point, right? So I'm thinking, maybe this is one of those things, you know? And this maybe tells you something weird about me, that I ended up, even with that in mind, I stayed around. And I hear this voice saying, would you like to join us? And so I just, sure, let's do it. You know, I'm down for this. So I go in there and, you know, 2 hours of, it was 1 hour of yoga and then 1 hour of chanting and meditating. And by the end of it, I spent the entire time in extreme discomfort, because I was going to the gym 6 days a week. You know, I wasn't a stranger to working out, and I was lifting weights a lot of the time, and I obviously don't do that these days, right? But that was really kind of my jam at the time. But I couldn't do this stuff physically. It was really hard. I was in extreme discomfort. The sitting was uncomfortable, the postures were uncomfortable, everything was just like, who does this to themselves? But I got through it and I felt amazing. It was the most incredible energy. And I just said, you know, I obviously suck at this because it's so hard, but like, this is my thing now. Like, I'm just all about this. And I knew it instantly. Like, I was just all about it. And here's the thing, on their calendar, it said that a yearly unlimited pass to the studio was $1,500. So I had a check in my pocket for $1,500 because I said, if I'm into this, I'm just doing it. And then guess what? They tell me that this isn't really a class, it's just our personal practice that we do together, and we don't accept payment for it. So when we talk about things kind of coming into alignment, I went every day. After doing it one time, I went every day. So all of a sudden I'm doing yoga and meditating 2 hours a day, from 4 to 6 in the morning. And then I start doing it on my own at home on the off days, once I learn enough about how they're doing it that I can kind of get the hang of it and do it by myself. But I knew, here's the thing, here's how I got on this path of being a coach, is that I knew immediately that I wanted to become a teacher. I just felt so amazing once I started doing it, and my life really turned around. I went back to school, finished my degree, moved to a better part of town. I mean, I was vegetarian for 5 years, really cleaned up my diet. I didn't touch alcohol for something like 7 years, you know? Um, so this thing really just made me feel amazing. And I just knew that I wanted to be a part of other people coming into contact with these kinds of things, with yoga and meditating, and also the kind of self-development stuff that Norma was teaching me, right? So then fast forward to 2012-ish. I've been teaching meditation for several years by then, 2 to 3 to 4 classes a week in Culver City in Los Angeles. And out of nowhere, I get recruited into a financial advisory firm. So that's another story for another time, because it's fairly involved. But what I ended up learning there was I got very into learning about, for the first time, really these contemporary teachers like Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy and a whole bunch of other names that I could mention, Steve Siebold among others, just so many people who taught self-development more in the business world. They teach lots of other people, but if you don't know anything else about them, they're sort of associated with business and entrepreneurship and things like time management, right? So I got very into that stuff and literate in that world as well. And then eventually I just said, this finance thing has been great. I've learned a lot. I've worked with some very high integrity people, some people that I still love and respect today, like J.R. Mejia, who runs the office out there in LA where I used to work. But I said, this just isn't me. No hard feelings, but I don't think this is really my path. And it also took all my time away from teaching and things like that. So I left that, and then I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I very gradually took everything that I learned about Eastern spirituality and yoga and meditation and things like herbal medicine and Ayurveda and things like that. And on the other hand, ideas like goal setting and time management and principles of communication and all kinds of things that were much more goal oriented, right? On the one hand, you've got this Eastern philosophy approach, which is much more about transcendence and peace and sort of looking through and beyond the world and looking inside you at the same time. And then you've got things that are all about, in some ways, about the bottom line, which is just as important. And I didn't realize how it was just as important when I was only doing, yoga and meditation, So I got both of these things sort of hammered into my head, and at times where I knew that I needed to learn as much as I possibly could, as fast as I possibly could, because I was diving in. In both cases, I just dove in. And so my own coaching became really a synthesis of the two. And, it's been a wonderful journey. And to basically what I thought when I left finance is, I don't want to just go get some job again. I'll do what I have to do to sort of get by and make ends meet in terms of little gigs here and there. But in terms of a career, it just has to be me. And the way this has worked out is, I've just basically figured out, with a lot of help, Brendan Burchard is the guy who really put the idea in my head that I could do this professionally, that I could just coach professionally. Not just teach meditation classes, but essentially just talk to people for a living, right? So it's really just making a career out of my own personality and my own interests. And, if that story tells you anything, it's that if you honestly trace things back to what has always interested you and what's always gotten you fired up, what have you always been, like when you have a good conversation, what's it a conversation about, things like that, it points out to you what truly motivates you. Not just what you think is a noble aspiration or what you think would be a good way to make money or whatever. in my case, it was the excitement for new ideas that had brought me to music. It had brought me to classical music and to be a composer and to become an improvising musician, studying jazz music. And it was the same passion that brought me to the newness of Eastern philosophy, the newness of the way you used your mind when you meditate, or the way you go beyond your mind when you meditate. The ideas of self-development, thinking about your thinking about time and organization and looking into the future, thinking about the future with things like setting goals. These were all just new and big and challenging ideas. And from my interest in literature and poetry and writing poetry myself and all that kind of stuff, it was all the same. It was the excitement for ideas. And so the idea of making a career around sharing those ideas with other people and sharing the ideas that made the most positive impact in my own life, it was just a no-brainer. But nobody will ever give you permission to do that. You won't see an ad in the paper saying, now hiring, thought partnership. You know, good luck with that. You have to give yourself permission. I had to give myself permission, and it was not easy. A lot of people will doubt you. People who love you and believe in you and support you will doubt you because you're just doing something that's totally off the charts. It's not accounted for anywhere. It's not even really a job. You're creating the job. So, yeah, really, guys, that's all for now. Thank you for listening. My name is Jasvinder, and we'll talk again soon, guys. And have a nice day. Have a nice evening.